Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you and welcome to Islam and Life with me, Tariq Murdan, broadcasting from London. In today's show we ask the question, what is the major jihad and how can we succeed in it?
One of the most important duties of a Muslim is Jihad al-Nafs. Jihad, more generally, has been wrongly associated by both Muslims and non-Muslims with absurd un-Islamic practices. Whether it's violence against innocent people or the ludicrous sex jihad ordained by certain Wahhabi clerics. Jihad al-Nafs, however, is a struggle of the soul against some of our most instinctive natures and unlawful temptations. It requires immense concentration and willpower. Today's Islam and Life asks, what is the major jihad and how can we succeed in it?
This is an important question. Very often we listen to some voices in the West or in Muslim majority countries using the concept of jihad in a way which is completely inappropriate and wrong even. And yet we still have to be very clear about this, that the concept of jihad is central in the Islamic tradition, is central for many reasons. And one of these reasons is very much about this jihad in nafs, which is this struggle, this intimate struggle to try to be a better human being. Yet we need to understand here what is essential from an Islamic viewpoint in spiritual terms and also in social, cultural terms when it comes to jihad, which is a kind of effort. What is more than that? It's about resistance and sometimes resisting oneself and the temptations that we can have, and in which way this could be done, and especially in our time and in our societies. In the West or in Muslim majority countries, it's the same. Now, there is a tradition speaking about major jihad and minor jihad. This tradition, the prophetic tradition, is a weak one according to the scholars and the main majority scholars. But yet, we still can draw from this hadith, weak hadith, a very important lesson as to the way we have to deal with the priorities within our religion, within Islam, when it comes to the struggle with our own self and trying to be a better human being, and at the same time within our societies, in Muslim majority countries or in the West. These are questions that are essential for us today. How can we implement the spiritual dimension of our religion and at the same time being involved in our societies? And to answer all these questions, I'm joined by my guest, co-founder of the Muslim Debate Initiative, Abdullah El-Andalusi. Thank you so much for being with us today. Let me start with this concept because it's a central concept. We heard in many countries that even, when the colonizer were there, they were saying we have to remove the concept of jihad from the textbooks and from the Islamic terminology because it's perceived as first violent, or it was used by the resistant to colonialism, for example. So we need to come back to the essence of the word and try to understand what it means first. So how would you tackle this issue? We talk about jihad, so what?
Well, obviously the word jihad comes from, jihada, meaning to struggle, to strive. And it has a linguistic meaning which is used in various contexts. It's very similar to, I suppose, how the Europeans may use the term crusade, which means when they say we'll have a crusade against poverty or a crusade for helping the environment and so on and so forth. And in some ways, when we use the word jihad, it can be used in a number of these contexts, such as obviously jihad for charity, jihad for helping the poor, and also jihad al-nafs, also jihad to kind of against our bad inclinations and wanton inclinations which go against our teachings, the teachings of Islam. But of course, the Sharia meaning of jihad, which is well established, is obviously fighting so that Allah's word is the highest, as was discussed by the scholars. But of course, Whereas that particular jihad only occurs on the battlefield, only occurs in certain political circumstances. Jihad al-nafs is a lifelong thing, which starts from the moment we're born and ends when we pass over to the next side.
So that's very important, the multiple dimensions and the multiple meanings of jihad, and this is something which needs to be said, and especially when we have this media coverage confusing everything, but also Muslim voices that are confusing all the levels. So now if we come to the very essence of jihad al-nafs, which is something which has to do with reforming oneself, to try to change, which is the essence of our religion, because our religion is all about education. So you have to educate yourself. The very moment you are aware that there is one God, you start educating yourself. So how would you translate? How would you make it understandable that we need to go towards something which is striving against our bad inclinations? What does it mean exactly?
Well, I think jihad al-nafs is very different from just education, because education can be understood by the aql, the intellect. But the nafs is different, because you can believe something, but you find it hard to implement it or hard to do that. And so, we see when there was, people, new Muslims had come in, or these new Arabs had come into the time of the Prophet Muhammad, they came into Islam. And the Prophet Muhammad, said to these people, when they said they called themselves Muslims, saying, like, you have obviously, your tongues submit, but your heart still has to kind of reconcile itself with Islam. And that's the nature of the nafs. The nafs is almost runs parallel to the aql, and in a way, it's our first instinct. I mean, it's based on our instinct. It's based on our kind of almost our animal side, and we need it to survive, because when we are a child, when we grow up, we had to. If we face a situation where we're crossing a road and a car is going to come, your instinct kicks in, and it pushes you almost. It urges you to jump out. It gives you that very strong motivation, and we need to have those strong motivations to survive. That's part of the human psyche. But it is prone to being kind of programmed in the wrong way by various life circumstances, by things that happen in your life, which give you maybe inclinations which are incorrect, or it triggers at the wrong time. And our aql is our intellect allows us to understand what the truth is, and to say, well, where have we gone wrong in our nafs? What have life given to us, or maybe circumstances of my family, or circumstances of my society while I was growing up, which has inculcated me something in my nafs which I need to change, I need to redress, and then that's where the jihad begins.
Yes, but you are right. It's about the environment, it's about circumstances, it's about your own history, but it's also about the self. What we have in the Quran is وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, is that the way we have been created is we have the temptations, and we have also something which is this kind of yearning for what is right, for truth. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ حَبَّبَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْإِيمَانِ, meaning that God made this faith beautiful, and we love it. So there is something in us, and don't you think, in the way we are dealing with jihad al-nafs, that the starting point of the way you deal with yourself has to do with al-aql, which is your intellect, but also educating yourself. It's a long process. So how are we going to deal with this in our contemporary world, when we see so many things, so many temptations, of course, but also the environment is not conducive towards getting a better self or educating oneself?
Sure. Well, I mean, in the current context that Muslims live in Muslim countries and even in the West, the environment is not 100% conducive to helping us, and in some ways, when the Rasulullah ﷺ, the Prophet Muhammad, was said to be a mercy to mankind. He gave us a Sharia which helped us to create an environment which would be conducive to helping ourselves and helping to correct ourselves. And the Sharia hasn't come to oppress or force people on something. It's actually come to help us. The whole purpose of it is to help us with our jihad al-nafs, to actually rectify ourselves and to eliminate these temptations which make us go wayward. So I think there's that aspect of what Islam can give. Also, Islam gives us alternatives, and I think one kind of a good tactic we should use is to, instead of trying to resist temptation, find an alternative. You can't basically block a river by just making a dam and hoping it wouldn't go through. You have to give not a route to it, otherwise it's going to overflow.
So that's a very important point. We live in as you said, in Muslim majority countries today, or even in the West, the temptations are almost the same. And now with this communication, internet, it's everywhere. And we have this type of, the world now is very much, the globalization is very much about the global culture. And global culture is something which has to do with also challenging our spiritual life. So if we start with this, knowing that, what could be the steps through which a young Muslim, man or woman or an adult, can go in order to achieve this? Because what you are saying is that it's not only you, it's also the environment. And if you are dealing with an environment which is negative, you need to find alternatives. So that's fine. Let us be practical. How can we do that?
Sure. Well, I think one of the best ways is from the Prophet Muhammad's example. So he lived in Mecca for 12 to 13 years before he realized an Islamic society in Medina. And in those 12 to 13 years, with a very nascent Muslim community, they were basically, the way they dealt with these problems, these issues, was they were making themselves paragons of virtue and example to others, and they were basically conveying outward to themselves, instead of letting society dictate to them, but they were now trying to actually invite the open society, which had all these temptations, trying to invite that to the good. And I suppose if a person cannot lock themselves away from society, we live in society, we live in life's affairs. So instead of actually letting life's affairs dictate to us what we do and so on, we should actually be proactive and convey to the society around us, obviously in the best manner and in a nice way. But we should convey to them, and so that if we are so busy conveying to others and guiding others, then obviously these temptations won't have any time, so to speak, to kind of try to change us or push us in the wrong way, because we're so busy trying to actually help others. But at the same time, through helping others and by doing good, this is part of your jihad al-nafs. Because as I said, jihad al-nafs, what is the nafs? The nafs it gives you motivation to do actions within society to other people. So if let's say I'm a rude person, the only way I change it, it's not lock myself in a room and do dhikr. Well, that helps, of course. But also is to go out there and actually try to be better in how I treat other people. So I have to now use my social situations to help change my internal situation. And we are social creatures. And so the way to change ourselves is by helping to change ourselves and everyone around us in a good way.
Yes, that's an important point. And yet you are dealing with some Muslims and trends that are asking, and this is what I can see on the ground when I am dealing with Muslims on the ground within communities. Look, if I live in Muslim majority countries or if I live in the West, is the same. At the end, if I want to protect my soul, if I want to protect myself, I prefer to isolate myself in order to look at the priorities of my life, to purify myself, and to deal with people. The environment, it's important, and we know that how much it's important to have good companions, good friends, good brothers and sisters. So let us be together and forget about the world. We are not going to change the world, so let us protect ourselves. And you have some who now don't want to interact, so they don't want to be proactive, because they are scared that with this proactivity they are going to be colonized by the surrounding culture. While you have others saying exactly the opposite, is if you want to purify yourself, you have to contribute, you have to serve, you have to be proactive, exactly what you are saying. But there is a risk, and the risk is by interacting with people who don't share your principles, don't share your values, you can be lost in this world. So in one way you can be lost, on the other you are protecting and you are isolating yourself and not changing the world. And you are saying, in order to change yourself, change the world. What is the best option? How can we deal with this? Because this is exactly what we have on the ground. When it comes to purifying the self, how can you do this?
Sure. I think it's about, I think people who are worried when they interact with the world and the wider world and society about being corrupted by this interaction, they're worried because I think they feel that maybe their own basis is weak. The intellectual basis for their belief in Islam, their ideas and their traditions and things. And what we need is to ground ourselves solidly and intellectually upon why we are Muslim, what it means to be a Muslim, what are our values, what are our solutions. And then we can go out there confidently, being who we are, and inviting people to these values. And I think that's the difference. You can't just say someone who might be a Muslim because their parents are Muslim and then throw them out there to the wolves and hope they will survive. Because maybe they won't. Maybe they will have doubts because this is the first time their ideas are being challenged, and they never established their ideas based on an intellectual basis other than imitating their parents. So in order to be proactive and to go out there, we also have to have a solid basis for ourselves. And I think that basis should be rooted in, as you said, educating ourselves about what the deen means to us, its actual solutions it offers to life's affairs, and then we can go out there confidently.
Yes, so there is also in what you are saying a sense of a mission that you have within the society and towards the society you live in, which is also important. Now, what would you say to people saying, that's all fine? What I understood from Islam is the purification, Islah al-Nafs, Tazkiyat al-Nafs, it's all about this. And what we have, كما أرسلنا فيكم رسولا منكم يتلو عليكم آياتنا ويزكيكم, which is we sent to you someone from among you in order for him to say and give you the revelation and then to purify yourself. So purification is essential. And now I live in a world where it's all about actions. Yes, I can have a sense of a mission towards the society, but how can I purify myself, getting this inner peace in this world? Because at the end, the final objective, the highest objective is salamat al-nafs, which is this inner peace, al-nafs al-mutma'inna, the self which is at peace with itself. How can we get that?
Well, I think, that is, I think, something that Muslims have been striving for 1,400 years, and
all human beings.
All human beings. Mostly, we all have the nafs of luwama, which is basically we're trying to reproach ourselves, and we feel guilty when we do bad things, and we try to go on the right course. I think basically that when we try to to help perfect ourselves, you have to say perfect ourselves in what? A man who lives, let's say, on a desert island has no bad virtues because there's no one around him for him to be bad to or do bad things to, and he's by himself. So really, dealing with what's inside ourselves, as I said, is connected to other people. So being good to your parents is not something you're going to perfect if you don't see your parents, right? Likewise, if you're greedy for money, then you can only deal with that actually if you're actually in the marketplace. I'll give you an example that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he tried to treat people who were greedy for money and they may kind of use sales pitches which are not right and truthful. You know how salesmen speak. And the way to treat this, he said, was to give charity. And it's very interesting because, and it was by an action that you could help change your nafs. And the Rasulullah was very wise in saying this, because if you desire money and you're willing to lie to get to that money, then the way to kind of deal with that is to do the exact opposite of that action. And if you start giving away money for charity, it actually affects your nafs. It helps to change you. It's very hard to let's say, be angry at someone who maybe has offended you if you force yourself to actually embrace them and say you forgive them. It's hard to make, and that's how you help to change your nafs. There's many little tactics that the Rasulullah taught us about how to treat the nafs, and these are very psychological tactics. And I would say that when Muslims approach the whole idea of jihad al-nafs, it's very spiritualistic. I say it's actually psychological. We should intellectualize how we do this, because it's very practical and psychological about how to change ourselves. And so these are little attacks we should learn from the tactics that the Prophet Muhammad taught us to help change us. And one other example was a man an Arab man who spoke to Bilal and insulted him, saying that he was the son of a black mother. And it was this insult, this very prideful insult again, and it was derogatory against, obviously, black people. And when the Prophet Muhammad heard about this, he was angry, he was very upset. And the man, in order to help change himself from this pride he had of his race, he put his head on the ground and said, I will not lift it up until Bilal has put his foot on my head. So by debasing himself, by doing the exact opposite of his pride, he helped to change his nafs. And these are kind of things we can learn.
Yes, that's important. Yet if you listen to the Muslim voices around the world and the different trends within the Shia tradition and the Sunni tradition, it's all the same. What you have is people saying, if you want to get this right understanding of purifying yourself, Islah al-Nafs, Tazkiyat al-Nafs, in fact there is only one thing. It's by by the rules of Islam. So be strict with the rules. We have 5 pillars. This is avoid what is prohibited, do what is permissible, and that's it. Just follow the rules. Others will say that's not going to be enough. I need to have activities, what you are saying, which is exactly to be active. And others are saying, no, it's not about actions and it's not about prohibition, it's about meditation. It's the mystical side. So you have all these different things. What should someone follow when it has to do with purification?
Well, I think the natural way is a balance, the balanced look. I mean, the Prophet Muhammad, he would do, tahajjud, he would do night worship. In the daytime, he was a political leader, a military leader. He'd be a head of a family. He'd be a husband. He'd be a father. And so in all these relationships, he didn't abandon one relationship for the other. He didn't say, I'm going to become celibate to focus on my spirituality. He didn't do that. And in fact, when he heard of people doing that, he was very disapproving of it. He said that, he fasts and he breaks his fast and he gets married to women and so on. And anyone who doesn't follow his sunnah is not of him. So life was meant for living. But it was meant for living correctly. And tazkiyat an-nafs occurs through living correctly, not through denying yourself or for trying to fit yourself into a box. You have to give yourself alternatives. For example, you can't just tell a Muslim brother, for example, who is finding it difficult, let's say, to keep away from zina and all the bad things. You say to adultery or fornication, you say to him, okay, you should just fast perpetually. Without trying to open the door to say, you know what, here's an alternative, here's marriage, we'll try to make it easy for you to get married and so on and so forth. You have to give an alternative according to the halal. So in a way, you can't just expect humans to be robots. You have to understand that we're fallible. We have to be merciful with humans, and that's why I think Allah SWT is merciful with us, because He knows how much prone we are to mistakes, and nafs is very hard to fight against. So, inshallah, I think this is something that we need to bear in mind, and we should just basically push each other in the right way to go in the right directions, and not just force ourselves to be like robots and things.
Thank you so much. I think in this discussion, what is the starting point of everything is what we were saying, is that jihad is a central concept of Islam. We cannot remove it from our terminology, but we need to understand it in the right way. And what we were talking about is jihad and nafs today, which is striving against your own ego and sometimes your bad temptations. And what you were saying is that we need to be very careful. It's not only about ourselves, it's also about our environment. It's a two-way process to think about the two and to think about purification and action. And what you were ending with, which is important, which is a balancing way, which is, it's not only about following the rules, it's following the rules, but it's also acting in the name of your principles, and then it's also meditating. And as you were saying, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was praying during the night to change the world during the day, which is also the very important dimension of jihad and nafs. Well, that's all we have time for. Please let us know your thoughts and views on any of the shows you have seen, and here is the way to contact us.
We at Islam and Life would like to hear your views about the subjects that we discuss. We would also love to hear your suggestions for our program, so get in touch with us. You can share your thoughts with other Islam and Life fans, engage in debate, and find out how to watch our previous shows. Follow us on Twitter at Islam and Life TV, or join us on Facebook by liking our page, Islam and Life on Press TV.
Finally, I would like to thank my guest, Abdullah Andalusi. Thank you so much for your insight and your presence with us today. And I hope to see you next week, inshallah.